Another week of this 2013 NFL season draws closer, and right now we're kind of in that middle part of the fantasy football season. You've had your beginning portion, you've still got the tail end and the playoffs yet to come. The middle portion is kind of important because this is where teams start to really assert their playoff positioning and seeding. Teams start making a move, or teams start falling back from the pack and really doing themselves damage and missing the fantasy football playoffs. So it's important to continue to manage your lineups on a weekly basis. It's important to try to trade if your league's trade deadline hasn't already happened, to try and improve your team that way. Hitting the waiver wire, the free agent wire, making sure you're always vigilant, you're managing your rosters on a consistent basis. It only takes a couple minutes a day, to really make a big difference. So make sure you're doing that, and then watching my videos for my fantasy football advice. So, week 7, my fantasy football sit start. Let's get started. Let's start with quarterbacks to consider sitting this week. Colin Kaepernick of the 49ers taking on the Titans. The Titans are pretty solid defensively, and Kaepernick in the passing game of the 49ers right now, pretty much if he's not throwing the ball to Vernon Davis, he really doesn't have anybody else that he can throw it to and rely on a consistent basis. He hasn't been all that impressive. So he's a very shoddy and shaky week-to-week play. So I think there's better options in week number 7. Geno Smith of the Jets taking on the Patriots. In week 2, when he played the Patriots, he was He was mediocre at the very best. I would expect more of the same. He didn't play that well against Pittsburgh last week. So, again, probably better off to go with somebody else. Alex Smith of the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Houston Texans. Now, the Texans' defense didn't do a very good job against the Rams last week, but the Texans in general are still a relatively good defensive unit, and Alex Smith is still a mediocre at best NFL starting quarterback. So for this particular week, the matchup is not all that good. Sit him. Quarterbacks to consider starting this week. Andrew Luck of the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Denver Broncos. In all the furor and uproar and hubbub and publicity about Peyton Manning's return trip home, you've also got Andrew Luck facing off against the quarterback that he ultimately replaced in Indianapolis, and going against the Denver Broncos defense that, yeah, sure, they might have Von Miller back, they might have Champ Bailey working into the fold, but that defense is not all that good, and they've shown that throughout the course of this season. So I would expect Luck to put up some nice numbers. Nick Foles of the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys defense has shown a capacity to get shredded as well, and Foles looked great last week. So I'd expect him to do more of the same this week. Jay Cutler of the Bears taking on the Redskins. The Redskins defense really can't stop anybody. And Jay Cutler traditionally does well, puts up nice numbers against bad teams. The Redskins are a bad team, as I told you they were going to be at the beginning of the season. As a result, Cutler is a pretty solid, safe fantasy football start this week. I do believe that. Running backs to sit in week number 7. I'll go with Ray Rice, of the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Packers did a very, very good job of containing Ray Rice last week. Pittsburgh is familiar with Ray Rice and that Ravens offense since they play twice a year, every year in that AFC North. Rice hasn't been all that spectacular this year. He's had a game or two where he's looked great, and he's had a couple other games. He's battled injuries, or he just hasn't looked very good. I think there are some better options out there for you this week. Another running back to consider sitting, this week is Chris Johnson of the Tennessee Titans taking on the San Francisco 49ers. You got Sean Green working back in the fold. You have Jackie Battle, who takes some goal line and short yardage carries away. The bottom line is Chris Johnson hasn't been all that good this year, and he's getting goal line touches when they sparsely do come, vultured away from him by other running backs. That's not a good formula for a running back giving you a 15 or 20 point or more output. Running backs to consider starting this week. How about Joseph Randle, DeMarco Murray's replacement this week for the Dallas Cowboys, taking on the Philadelphia Eagles? The Eagles' defense isn't very good. Randall's going to get opportunities, and he's a guy who can catch some balls out of the backfield too, so it gives you some added value in PPR leagues. You've got Eddie Lacy of the Green Bay Packers taking on the Cleveland Browns. Now, you might say the Cleveland Browns defense is pretty good, and this is true, but this is also a Cleveland Browns defense that struggled with C.J. Spiller and Fred Jackson a couple of weeks ago, and Eddie Lacy had a hell of a game last week against the Baltimore Ravens. If you think about it, Eddie Lacy's had a couple of nice games in a row. He's on a little bit of a roll right now after his concussion and the Packers bye week. He's looked good. So he might be a hot hand that's worth looking at and running with right now. And Jacquizz Rodgers of the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Rodgers is going to get more of the opportunities. The Falcons are coming off of a bye week. Rodgers, again, as you from value in PPR leagues, so he's probably a guy that's available on some of your waiver wires. You need a bye week fill-in. Well, there's one right there, and he'll probably give you something like 12 to 15 points this week. Now we move on to wide receivers. Let's look first at the ones you should consider sitting in week number 7. Dwayne Bowe of the Chiefs taking on the Houston Texans. Bowe has pretty much done nothing this year. Much better options out there, even on your league's waiver wire right now. Mike Wallace, Miami Dolphins, taking on the Buffalo Bills. Again, Mike Wallace really hasn't done shit yet this year. I'd expect at some point he'll have a couple of nice big games, but he hasn't had much of any yet. So as a result, again, there's better options. Kenbrell Tompkins, the New England Patriots, taking on the Jets. The Jets secondary is pretty good. Tompkins is a very touchdown-reliant wide receiver 3 right now, and with it looking like Gronkowski may finally come back in week number 7 against the Jets, according to his agent Drew Rosenhaus, Tompkins is going to see his red zone targets diminish, and as a result, he's only getting 5 targets a game, 2 to 3 catches. Without those touchdowns, he really doesn't have much value. Torrey Smith of the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers did a good job defensively against the Jets last week. Torrey Smith was shut down by a Green Bay Packers defense that has some missing pieces on it, most notably Clay Matthews. So they were able to shut down Torrey Smith. I think the Steelers might be able to do the same thing. Wide receivers to start this week. Harry Douglas of the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Julio Jones gone for the year. Roddy White out for week 7. Somebody's got to start. Matt Ryan's going to throw the ball. Has to throw it to somebody other than Tony Gonzalez and maybe Jacquizz Rodgers out of the backfield at some point in time. The leading candidate, watch me say it's Harry Douglas, and it'll end up being like Drew fucking Davis has like 100 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 7. But Harry Douglas, got to go with him. You got to ride it right now. He's going to get some targets. And Matt Ryan does statistically like to target him in the red zone, which means you might have the chance to get a bonus 6 points out of a touchdown out of Harry Douglas. And I'm surprised with Julio Jones' injury and Roddy White being out right now. I'm surprised that more people haven't jumped on the Harry Douglas bandwagon. T.Y. Hilton of the Colts taking on the Denver Broncos. As I mentioned before when talking about Andrew Luck and starting him this week, the Broncos' defense is not very good. Justin Blackmon shredded him last week for 191 or 190 yards receiving. T.Y. Hilton is that type of receiver that the Broncos secondary could have all types of trouble with. Hilton's a must start, in my opinion, in week 7. Jarrett Boykin of the Green Bay Packers taking on the Cleveland Browns. With James Jones being out and Randall Cobb being out for a period of time, you've got Jordy Nelson and Jarrett Boykin. Stranger things have happened. Aaron Rodgers is a type of caliber of quarterback that could make a very productive player out of somebody like a Jarrett Boykin. And again, if you're looking at your waiver wire and you're desperate to cover a bye week, or you're trying to go out there and throw your bobber out and you're hoping to reel in the big one, maybe get lucky. Boykin might be the guy. Brandon LaFell of the Carolina Panthers taking on the St. Louis Rams. The Rams played much better over the past couple of weeks, but their defense still has had a lot of problems. And LaFell had a huge week last week, so he might be in for a big afternoon against the questionable St. Louis Rams secondary. Tight ends for week number 7. The ones you should sit. Jermaine Gresham of the Bengals. I've talked about it before. He's going against the Lions. Eifert's getting more looks and more targets. And that's it. It's very simple. Gresham's the number 2 tight end, even if he's a starter right now. So don't play him. Garrett Graham of the Texans taking on the Chiefs. The Chiefs are really, really good defensively. And with Case Keenum starting at quarterback, I'm not going to advise any of you at this point to start any wide receiver or tight end in the Texans offense. Although with Garrett Graham, he does have some potential to still produce, even though he didn't have a great week last week against the Rams, because in that offense, their quarterbacks in Houston love to check down the ball and love to throw the tight end in the red zone. But Graham, probably not the safest pick to start this week. Tight ends to start in week 7. Drew Rosenhaus, Rob Gronkowski's agent, said he's finally medically cleared and he'll be able to play on Sunday. If that's the case, you've got to start Gronkowski as your tight end 1 on Sunday. If you've held on to him for this damn long, you've got to take that chance. You've sat on him for 6 weeks. Yeah, I have him in a couple of leagues. I've sat on him and just ate the roster spot and held on to him and held on to him. And now is the chance that it pays off, and it pays off big. Jermichael Finley of the Green Bay Packers with, again, Randall Cobb out for an extended period of time, and James Jones out, at least for this game, it looks like. You've got Jermichael Finley is going to get more opportunities, more targets, more catches, more yards, potentially more touchdowns, because he's going to line up more outside, line up at wide receiver more, and he's going to get more looks from Aaron Rodgers. That's what you want to see. Jordan Reed of the Washington Redskins taking on the Chicago Bears. Jordan Reed impressed me when I saw him last week against the Cowboys. He's the type of tight end that the Bears have some trouble matching up with and adjusting to. As a result, I would expect slowly but surely RG3 is going to start to look Jordan Reed's way more and more. And if you've got a tight end that's on a bye week this week, maybe you have somebody like a Jimmy Graham and you just need a 1 week fill-in, Jordan Reed might be your guy. So remember, if you have any questions about your lineup for this week, or if you have any questions about guys on your free agent or waiver wire, or any questions about trade possibilities, anything like that, make sure you post in the comment section below, and I'll get to as many of them as I possibly can. Also, I love hearing about any stories where I've maybe helped you achieve some fantasy success through my different fantasy videos that I've done over the past year. I'd love to hear some of these stories, especially for this 2013 fantasy football season. Just a couple of guys to keep your eyes on the waiver wire in general that you maybe should be thinking about picking up right now. Keep your eye out with Steven Jackson, because a lot of people are cutting him right now because they're trying to cover bye weeks and Jackson's out. Some of the reports you read aren't that good. If you're desperate for running back help, you have the ability to, eat up a roster spot for a few weeks. It might be worth a gamble taking a flyer on Steven Jackson. Also, Randall Cobb. He might be back in week 15, why is that important? Because that's right around the time that most leagues have their semifinal round of their fantasy football playoffs. So when you look at a guy like Randall Cobb, who can give you some added value even in PPR leagues, he's the type of guy that if you can afford, again, and this might be more so for the good teams that want to be great, it might be worth adding a Randall Cobb, hiding him on your roster, and taking a flyer and a chance on the fact that he comes back in week 15 or week 16 and gives you 1 or 2 big games, and he might be the big difference maker that you need to help you win a fantasy championship. Just keep your eye on those type of guys like Steven Jackson, guys like Randall Cobb. Another guy to keep your eye on, even though when he comes back in a couple of weeks, he might only be a running back too, is Shane Vereen of the New England Patriots. He looks like he might be back week 10, week 11 at the latest. You know that he's going to get some opportunities in that Patriots offense, and if Ridley has any trouble in the future fumbling the ball, or if he has any trouble staying healthy, which is very possible, and Vereen can stay healthy and hold on to the ball, which is at least somewhat possible, then you could be looking at a guy like Vereen that you stored on your bench now that come the fantasy playoffs might be getting some big-time yardage and some big-time touchdowns for you when you really need it the most. So just some guys to keep your eye on out there. Jordan Reed, Jarrett Boykin, guys like that. These are guys, Harry Douglas, that could help you out right now and for the weeks to come. So keep your eye on these guys. If you have the ability to pick some of them up, do it because I said so. Yes, exactly.